17, verses 1 through 9. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them. And from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." The word of the Lord. This might be one of my favorite passages to preach from, because I find this passage incredibly funny. Incredibly funny for a couple reasons. The Transfiguration is this magic, cosmic event. Jesus takes several of his disciples up to a mountain. And when they get there, Jesus is transfigured into a shining figure, his clothes white, light emanating out from him. With him are titans of the Jewish world, writers of the law, Moses and Elijah, with whom all the Hebrews are familiar. It is a magic, cosmic event. And Peter, in his amazement, says, "Do you want me to build you some tents?" On the surface, not funny, right? That seems normal to want to build tents for people, but imagine Abraham Lincoln came to your house today, and you told Abraham Lincoln, "Do you want me to heat you up a Hot Pocket?" As absurd as that offer is, so too is the absurdity of Peter saying, "Let me build you a tent." With what would these people need tents? These people who seem to have conquered death, these people who are shining, these people about whom God has just spoken from the clouds. Why would they need a tent? They don't need a tent, of course. But this is a very human, very lowly, earthly Peter trying to make sense of the divine in his own very small context. I see 3 people, very, very, very important. Let me do what little I can to give them some sort of comfort. But of course, that's not what they need, nor what they want. The second funny thing I find about this passage is when it's over. Everyone has just had an incredible experience, an indescribable experience. And as they're walking down the mountain, Jesus says, "Hey fellas, let's just keep this between us for now, okay?" "Oh sure, Jesus, the most magical thing that's ever happened to me in my entire life. I'm just going to shut up about it like it never happened, right? Until after you're risen again. Sure, yeah, no problem. That would be really easy for us to do, right? If something like that happened to us, did Abraham Lincoln come over to your house? No, and he didn't want a Hot Pocket either, right? We're not going to talk about that. I would be talking about that. But there's a message in here that makes it not funny again. And I think to Peter and the disciples, who, if you read through the Gospels, you realize they constantly, repeatedly, faithfully get it wrong. Up to the very end of the Gospels, they misunderstand. They lose hope, they lose faith, they take things too literally or not literally enough. Peter doesn't get it. And I wonder why God said through Jesus, "Don't tell anybody." And I wonder if the reason that Jesus said to them, "Don't tell anybody," is because if they told everybody, they wouldn't get it either, and they too would try to put Jesus in a tent. Unfortunately, I believe that is what has happened whenever Jesus has revealed himself to be divine. we seek to put Jesus in a tent. And we do it respectfully, right? We do it in worship, and we do it with reverence. We want to put Jesus into a house with 4 defined corners where we can see every part of Jesus, where Jesus can't get too far from us, so we can know what is right and what is wrong, what Jesus wants, what Jesus doesn't want, and how amazing Jesus is and how not amazing everybody else is. We like to see Jesus in definable ways. We like to know everything. And it gets so much to a point that we worship Jesus so much, we forget everything Jesus said. Everything Jesus taught us. I was raised Catholic. And I love Catholicism. I think it is a beautiful faith. I think it is a worshipful faith. I think it is an artful faith. But I'm no longer a Catholic for reasons, right? One of the reasons is in something called the Nicene Creed. And I wonder if you've ever heard the Nicene Creed or are familiar with the Nicene Creed. In the Nicene Creed, it is basically a big statement about what we believe as Catholics, right? In there, it talks about Jesus. Born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. This is part of the Nicene Creed. And in there is a comma. Born of the Virgin Mary, crucified under Pontius Pilate. We went straight from Jesus being born to Jesus being dead. And everything Jesus said in the middle, nothing. And we like to laugh at that as non-Catholics, like, oh, the Catholics don't care about what Jesus said. And yet, we do the same thing. We worship God through Jesus as God, the most divine, the most powerful, and then forget what Jesus said. We take Jesus, this larger-than-life, amazing, magical, mystical, cosmic character, and we say, let me put you in a tent where you'll be safe from the bad guys. Jesus doesn't need that. God doesn't need that. God doesn't want that. If the gospel message should tell us anything, it's that Jesus wants the gospel to be free from boundaries, free from those human institutions that bind us and keep people on the outside and people on the inside. People who are good enough to be in the tent with Jesus and people who are not good enough and have to stay outside. That is not what Jesus wants. Time and time again, Jesus makes contact with people who have historically been outside of the tent, with the adulterer, with the widow, with women, with children, with everybody. How do we put Jesus in a tent and separate these people from ourselves? I think, if you were to ask me, we do it through our words, the way we speak about other people. I invite you to look on the front of your bulletin if you have it. I love this picture. As a former Catholic, it means a lot to me. This is Our Lady of Silence. It is a depiction of the Virgin Mary, and she has her finger in front of her mouth. This picture is hung in the Vatican between 2 elevators, so that Pope Francis has to look at it every day. And on the back of the painting, he's written in gold Sharpie, "Don't gossip." Right? This, I have notes because it's hard to remember some of these names and things. This was a painting commissioned by a Catholic priest named Emiliano Antonucci. And he is a chaplain to prisoners in Italy. Many of those prisoners being mafioso, in the mafia. So he's seen a lot of things. He has written books about the value of silence, and he has some great things to say about them. And this is one of my favorite books. Silence is the womb where words that are true are born. Silence is the womb where words that are true are born. Sounds like a paradox. How can we be forming words when the very idea of forming words is not silent? But we like to form words. Words draw meaning to things. Words are what make up the Bible. Words are what make up our bylaws, our Constitution, our laws. Words. Words are what make boundaries. Words are what make tents. Words are those constructions that can bring us together, but they can also split us apart. Maybe someone has said a word or words to you that have split you apart. Maybe someone has used a charged word, an offensive word, an egregious word, to say in very few syllables how much you are not wanted, how much you are not welcome, and how low they think of you. When was the first time you were told that you were going to hell? I keep a scrapbook whenever someone tells me that. So I remember my first time, and it was when I was a Catholic. And I was working at my first job in the Air Force at Scott Air Force Base, Illinois. And because I was a Catholic, one of my very well-meaning evangelical friends told me, you should get saved, because if you don't, you're going to hell. You have to accept Jesus. And I'm thinking, my God, we still have Jesus on the cross at church. I don't know, that's kind of a big part of Catholicism is Jesus. But he wasn't buying it. He was using words to drive a wedge between us, to drive a wedge between Jesus and my heart. How often do we use words to try to draw people to Jesus, but instead of pushing them away? How often do we approach people and say, if you're not Christian, you're not right? How often do we approach people and say, your lifestyle is unacceptable? How often do we approach people with kindness and compassion in our hearts, but venom on our lips? Words that divide. Words that build tents around Jesus, who is in and who is out. Last month, I had the privilege of going to Lexington. I told you this a couple times. And there I took a class on mission in the 21st century. And I was exposed to this new idea. And it's called apophatic faith. You don't have to write that down. It's not that important. But apophatic faith basically means I don't know anything. The only thing I know for sure is that I don't know. And I thought they could have told me about this before I spent so much money on 4 years of seminary, but whatever. But apophatic faith says there is such a large and wide expression of God, and the cosmos is so amazing that as soon as we start putting words to it, we're making fools of ourselves, like Peter, when he's saying, let me put this cosmic divine God into a tent. As soon as we start making certainties, we can be sure that we are uncertain. And oh boy, do Christians love to make certainties. They are certain that they are the only people who get to go to heaven. They are certain that they are so righteous and good that they forget to consider, maybe I'm not. My faith revolves around not knowing but loving anyway. Maybe certainty isn't the goal. And that's where I sort of land, is apophatic. You can love God and not know anything. You can serve God and not know anything. And when you don't know anything and you admit that you don't know anything, it opens up so many more avenues to experience God. Every time I read the Bible, it's like going into a giant museum and I see something there that I didn't see before. And the idea that I could walk through the whole museum and see everything is hilariously misguided. The idea that anyone could, I think, is hilariously misguided. It's a never-ending treasure trove of wisdom. And we like to think that we figured it out. We figured God out. Case closed, book over. But that's not the way God is. I'm not evangelical, but evangelism is an important part of our faith, bringing people into the fold of God's love and grace. Here's the thing. You should know about evangelism. You don't need to say anything through it. That's my strategy. I encourage you guys to try this. If you're looking to bring people into the fold of love and faith that God has inspired in your heart, do this. Shush. Don't talk about it. Don't talk about Jesus. I know that sounds heretical. That sounds like, oh, Pastor Gray, what about the Great Commission? We're supposed to tell everybody. Okay, don't use words. Let's pretend it's like, if you ever played Taboo, let's play Taboo with it. How do you tell someone you're a Christian without telling them with words? How do you show someone you're a Christian without telling them through words? It is amazing how much you can do for someone just by acting like Jesus, but not talking about it. Quiet, contemplation, grace. These are tools in our toolbox that are the most useful, the most powerful. Quiet faith. Quiet, like being mentored by someone on how to use basic tools. Quiet, like getting a cup of coffee with a good friend. Quiet, like showing up for the family of the bereaved to cook. Quiet, serviceful, loving. These are the Christian way. So let's not rush to make definitions. Let's not rush to erect walls. Let's not rush to talk about it. Let's instead be quiet. Let's instead listen for God, instead of telling God what God should be doing for us. Let's sit with our quiet, with open hearts and open ears and open hands ready to serve. Let's be unlike Peter, but like Jesus.